Iran on Sunday issued its first known death sentence. It's connected to the government's crackdown on what is now more than 2 months of anti-regime demonstrations. The death sentence is itself not facing a death of its own. According to Amnesty International, more than two-thirds of countries in the world have abolished the death penalty in law or at least in practice. That means that they have not executed anyone for at least 10 years. But 55 countries still use the death penalty. Often these are countries that are considered to have flawed or unfair justice systems. China is estimated to be the world's leading executioner. It is followed by Iran, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and Syria. Globally, Amnesty found at least 579 people were put to death by governments last year. That is not including the estimated thousands who were executed in China, from where there's a lack, of course, of official data and information. Well, for the next 3 days, politicians and activists from around the world, they are meeting for the World Congress Against the Death Penalty right here in Berlin. One of those is here with me at the big table tonight, John Bessler. He's a professor of law at the University of Baltimore and at Georgetown University in the U.S. He is also author of the book, The Death Penalty's Denial of Fundamental Human Rights. And Professor, we are glad to have you with us tonight. I just wanted to ask you, you are from the United States, a country where the death penalty is legal, where the death penalty is carried out still. I mean, that club, as we just heard, includes countries such as China, Saudi Arabia, Iran, Egypt. What's it like being an American law professor at a World Congress dedicated to abolishing the death penalty?
Yeah, I've been working on this issue for about 30 years, actually. And this is the 8th World Congress, actually, in Berlin. These are held periodically. Yeah. And both the German justice minister and the German foreign minister spoke out against the death penalty, and in one case described how it's really inconsistent with democracy. And if we look at the kinds of countries that are using the death penalty regularly, you see China, Iran, Iraq, North Korea, and the U.S. just shouldn't belong in that list. Mm-hmm. And so I think we need to start thinking about the death penalty not through the frames of some sort of crime control, but through clearly the lens of human rights, which is now where squarely Europe is.
Yeah, I want to pick up on that. You've argued that human rights, as outlined in the 1948 Universal Declaration of Human Rights, cannot be truly universal as long as there are countries with the death penalty. Talk me through that. Why do you think the two are connected?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Universal Declaration of Human Rights outlawed torture and says no one shall be subjected to torture or cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment. And if you think about what the death penalty actually is, the death penalty really just constitutes a series of death threats. If you think about capital charge, it's on a piece of paper, but it's really a death threat. A death sentence is just a more credible death threat. And then ultimately, as you approach the actual execution, that instills that fear of death. And a mock execution, a simulated execution, is already considered a classic example of psychological torture. So in Germany, they put it in the Constitution in 1949, the death penalty is abolished. And in the Geneva Convention, the Third Geneva Convention, we see a prohibition against both physical and mental torture. But in the United States, we've not focused sufficiently on the concept of mental torture, that idea that simply subjecting someone to a threat of death is itself torturous.
We've heard that from American, not only attorneys, but professors such as yourself, that when people are on death row, just the fact that they know that their death is imminent and they can't do anything to change it, that in itself is tantamount to torture.
Right, and the European case law actually establishes that. There's a case called Soring, which says that there's something called the death row phenomenon, and that means that there's not extraditions going on to the United States from actually not just Europe, but other places around the world. And actually that squares up with the provision against the Convention Against Torture, which says you should not return someone to a place where they might be subjected to torture. So that's kind of I think the main argument to think about, is to think of it through a different lens, because the states that actually carry out the death penalty actually have higher violent crime rates than those that, on average, that don't have the death penalty.
Well, let me pick up on this notion of violent crime. Politicians in the United States have argued now for decades that the death penalty is a deterrent. In this last midterm election that we saw, one of the main issues is the increase in violent crime in the United States. I mean, how do you explain this, that we're not seeing the death penalty deterring murders, for example?
Right. I mean, what I'd like to say is that, crime is about what the offenders do. And obviously people have a right to be concerned about crime. They should be concerned about crime, absolutely. But the punishment is about what we're going to do in response to the crime, how we're going to act. And so if you think about it that way, you need to start thinking about how we're behaving. And so, for example, non-lethal corporal punishments have long been put aside. Things like whipping prisoners. In the old days, they used to subject people to the pillory and the stocks. Those things are no longer allowed. And so what we're seeing is countries around the world are moving against the death penalty, as you noted. South Africa's Constitutional Court of South Africa actually declared the death penalty unconstitutional back in the mid-90s. So the Supreme Court, which actually once did declare the death penalty unconstitutional in 1972,
That's right.
and then reversed course, maybe they had it right in 1972.
Well, we know that they do also now have a track record of changing their minds when it comes to important court decisions. Professor John Bessler, we appreciate you coming in and talking with us tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.